Why did Jacob, the patriarch of Israel, do something so extraordinary at the end of his life? He not only blessed his grandsons, Manasseh and Ephraim, Joseph's sons in Egypt, but also adopted them, placing them on the same level as his own sons, Reuben and Simeon. But why did Reuben, the firstborn, lose his position? And why did Jacob reverse the order of the blessings, placing the younger, Ephraim, above Manasseh? Jacob's decision was not just a family or emotional choice. It carried a spiritual and prophetic weight that changed the destiny of Israel forever. Today, this story teaches us a lot about God's plan, His sovereignty, and how He can use the unlikely to fulfill His purposes. In this video, you will understand why Reuben and Simeon lost Jacob's favor, the spiritual significance of the adoption of Manasseh and Ephraim, and what this ancient story teaches us about trusting in God even when everything seems unexpected. The story of Manasseh and Ephraim begins long before their encounter with Jacob, and to fully understand the impact of the patriarch's decision, we must go back in time and observe Joseph's journey. Joseph's life is one of the most thrilling and transformative stories in the Bible. He not only faced unexpected twists, but also demonstrated unshakable faith and remarkable trust in God's plan, even in the midst of the greatest adversities. Joseph was Jacob's favorite son, born of his beloved Rachel, which already caused jealousy among his brothers. But what truly intensified their hatred were Joseph's prophetic dreams. In them, Joseph saw himself as a leader over his family, something incomprehensible and unacceptable to his older brothers. Genesis 37, 5-11. Driven by jealousy, his brothers plotted against him. First, they threw him into a cistern, and then they decided to sell him as a slave to Ishmaelite merchants heading to Egypt. For Joseph, the ordeal was just beginning. He was taken to a foreign land, far from his family, and sold again, this time to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Despite being a slave, Joseph remained faithful to God. He quickly gained Potiphar's trust and was put in charge of his entire household. However, injustice struck his life. After resisting the advances of Potiphar's wife, Joseph was falsely accused of trying to assault her and ended up imprisoned. In prison, his faith did not waver. Joseph continued serving, and God was with him, granting him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. It was there that he interpreted the dreams of two of Pharaoh's servants, the cupbearer and the baker. This gift, given by God, would be his way out. Years later, when Pharaoh had disturbing dreams that no one could interpret, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. Joseph was summoned before Pharaoh, and with divine wisdom, he revealed the meaning of the dreams. 7 years of abundance would be followed by 7 years of severe famine. Impressed, Pharaoh not only believed Joseph, but also appointed him governor of all Egypt, placing him in charge of preparing the nation for the crisis. Now, from an unjustly treated slave, Joseph became the second most powerful man in Egypt. This rise was not just a personal achievement, but part of God's plan to preserve Jacob's descendants and fulfill his promises. In this context, Joseph married Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, Genesis 41:45. This union was not only a personal milestone for Joseph, but also symbolized how God was fulfilling his promise to bless him, even in a foreign land. From this marriage, 2 sons were born, Manasseh and Ephraim. Each of them received a name with profound spiritual significance, reflecting Joseph's journey up to that moment. Manasseh: God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. Genesis 41:51. This name does not mean that Joseph abandoned his family, but rather that God had healed him from the emotional burden of his past traumas. He was learning to live with joy and purpose, even far from home, Ephraim. God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. Genesis 41:52. This name celebrated God's faithfulness in turning adversities into blessings. Joseph's story culminates in his reunion with his family during the famine that struck the entire region. His brothers, who had sold him into slavery, arrived in Egypt seeking food, unaware that the one they were pleading with was the very brother they had betrayed. Joseph's response was one of compassion, not revenge. He recognized God's sovereignty over all the events in his life and declared, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Genesis 50:20. Thanks to Joseph's wisdom and position, Jacob's family found refuge in Egypt and was preserved during the years of famine. Manasseh and Ephraim grew up in this environment, intertwining their Israelite identity with Egyptian culture. However, the story takes on a new dimension when Jacob, now old and aware that his days were coming to an end, makes the decision to adopt his two grandsons as if they were his own sons. This action was not merely symbolic. It placed Manasseh and Ephraim on the same level as Jacob's other sons, ensuring them a direct share in Israel's inheritance. In the culture of that time, birthright and inheritance were directly related to the continuity of God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. By adopting Manasseh and Ephraim, Jacob was declaring that Joseph's sons would not only be part of the 12 tribes of Israel, but would play a central role in shaping the nation. This decision was even more significant because Joseph had been away from his family for most of his life. By including his sons in the patriarchal blessing, Jacob fully restored Joseph's connection to the line of promise. Now, you may be wondering, why did Jacob do this? This decision had deep spiritual motivations. Throughout his life, Jacob had learned that God does not act according to human logic. He himself, being the younger son, received Isaac's blessing instead of Esau, the firstborn. Now he saw in Joseph's sons an opportunity to continue this line of grace, placing God's sovereignty above human traditions. Jacob was aware that his family was imperfect. Reuben, his firstborn, had lost his place of honor by dishonoring his father, Genesis 35:22. Simeon and Levi had also committed acts of extreme violence, Genesis 34. By highlighting Manasseh and Ephraim, Jacob was declaring that God can redeem stories and use whomever he wills to fulfill his plans. To fully understand the adoption of Manasseh and Ephraim, we need to examine the background of this decision. Why did Jacob remove Reuben, his firstborn, and Simeon, the second in line, from prominence? After all, in ancient culture, birthright was almost a sacred right, ensuring family leadership and a double portion of the inheritance. Reuben was Jacob's firstborn son with Leah, his first wife. As the eldest, he should have inherited the role of leader among his brothers. However, Reuben lost this privilege due to a serious mistake. He had relations with Bilhah, one of Jacob's concubines, Genesis 35:22. This act was seen as an unacceptable act of disrespect, not only against his father, but also against the established family order. When Jacob confronts Reuben, his words are direct and harsh. "Unstable as water you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed and defiled it." Genesis 49:4. Reuben had demonstrated a lack of character and self-control, essential qualities for someone who was supposed to lead and carry the blessing of the birthright. As a result, Jacob decided that he would not be the primary heir. Reuben's mistake was personal. Simeon and Levi's were public and violent. These two brothers led a brutal act of vengeance against the men of Shechem after the incident involving their sister Dinah, Genesis 34. Although their motivation was to protect their family's honor, their actions were marked by extreme violence and deceit. They killed all the men of Shechem, causing scandal and putting Jacob's entire family in danger. Jacob, at the end of his life, recalls Simeon and Levi's actions with sorrow. Cursed be their anger so fierce and their wrath so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. Genesis 49:7. This prophecy was later fulfilled. Simeon was largely absorbed into the tribe of Judah, and Levi did not receive a territorial inheritance, becoming a priestly tribe instead. With Reuben disqualified and Simeon and Levi also losing their positions, room was made for Jacob to make a surprising decision: to grant Joseph, through his sons Manasseh and Ephraim, the double portion of inheritance that traditionally belonged to the firstborn. Jacob saw in Joseph a faithful son, a man who had endured adversity with faith and remained upright amid trials. For this reason, Joseph's sons would be elevated to the status of direct sons of Jacob. They would take the prominent place that Reuben and Simeon had lost. The most unexpected moment of the adoption of Manasseh and Ephraim occurs when Jacob begins to bless them. Joseph, as a good father, carefully positions his sons before Jacob. Manasseh, the firstborn, at Jacob's right hand, and Ephraim, the younger, at his left. After all, according to tradition, the most significant blessing was meant for the eldest son, but something surprising happens. Jacob crosses his hands, placing his right hand on Ephraim and his left hand on Manasseh. Joseph, confused, tries to correct his father. "No, my father, this is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." Genesis 48:18. But Jacob refuses, saying, "I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a multitude of nations." Genesis 48:19. Jacob's decision was not arbitrary. He was being guided by God, as in so many other moments of his life. Jacob knew through divine revelation that God's plan for Ephraim was greater than that for Manasseh. Although both were blessed, Ephraim would have a prominence that would be seen throughout Israel's history. This reversal is a recurring theme in the Bible. God often chooses the unlikely, the weaker, or the younger to fulfill his purposes. We see it with Cain and Abel, Ishmael and Isaac, Esau and Jacob, and now with Manasseh and Ephraim. This pattern challenges human norms and reminds us that God does not act according to our expectations. Jacob's blessing upon Ephraim and Manasseh was not merely symbolic, it was a prophetic act pointing to the future. Ephraim, the younger, would become one of the most powerful and influential tribes of Israel. In fact, the name Ephraim was often used to represent the northern kingdom, composed of the 10 tribes. On the other hand, Manasseh, though also blessed, had a less prominent position. He became an important tribe, but never reached the influence of Ephraim. Jacob's decision to adopt Manasseh and Ephraim as his own sons was a prophetic act that had repercussions throughout Israel's history. These two young men were not just Jacob's grandsons, they were placed among the patriarchs who would give rise to the tribes of Israel. But what really happened to their legacy over time? Manasseh received a unique territorial inheritance. The tribe was divided on both sides of the Jordan River. This division was not a sign of weakness, but of expansion and influence. Manasseh became one of the largest tribes in terms of territory, occupying fertile and strategic lands. This position gave them an important role in Israel's economy and defense. For example, part of the tribe was in Transjordan, a region rich in pastures and trade, while the other part occupied central areas of the Promised Land. They were also known for their military bravery, especially in the conquest campaigns led by Joshua. However, Manasseh's history also reveals moments of failure. The tribe was criticized for not completely driving out the Canaanites from their land, which resulted in coexisting with idolatrous cultures and negatively influencing the people of Israel. Judges 1:27-28. This shows us how God's blessing can be compromised when we are not fully obedient. Ephraim, on the other hand, stood out as one of the most influential tribes in Israel. Although he was the younger of the two brothers, Jacob's blessing was fulfilled in an impressive way. Joshua, the great leader who led Israel in the conquest of the Promised Land, was from the tribe of Ephraim, Numbers 13:8. Later, Ephraim became the dominant tribe in the northern kingdom, and its name came to be used synonymously with the entire kingdom. For example, in Hosea, God frequently refers to the northern kingdom as Ephraim, Hosea 4:17, showing the symbolic and practical influence of this tribe. Nevertheless, Ephraim's leadership brought challenges. The tribe often exhibited pride and self-sufficiency, which led to internal conflicts with other tribes and eventually to their downfall into idolatry. This trajectory teaches us that a prominent position comes with great spiritual responsibilities. More than a matter of territory or leadership, the adoption of Manasseh and Ephraim points to a pattern of how God works. Jacob brought two young men born in Egypt outside the immediate context of Israel and placed them at the heart of the covenant. This reminds us that God is the God of inclusion. He does not limit his blessings based on where we were born, our origins, or our history. Jacob's act points to the divine adoption that we all receive in Christ. Just as Manasseh and Ephraim were elevated to the position of sons, God elevates us to the position of sons and daughters through Jesus Christ, granting us access to an eternal inheritance. Romans 8:15-17. The story of these tribes continues to resonate in our lives. Are we using the blessings God has given us for his glory, as Ephraim and Manasseh were called to do? Are we fulfilling our purpose, or are we allowing distractions and external influences to weaken our faithfulness to God? Manasseh teaches us the importance of fully occupying the territory God gives us without compromise. Ephraim reminds us that with great blessings come great spiritual responsibilities. Both point to the necessity of trusting in God's sovereignty and his plans, which always exceed our expectations. Now that you know the story of Manasseh and Ephraim, what stood out to you the most? If this message touched your heart, I invite you to share this video with someone who could also benefit from this teaching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to continue enjoying more in-depth content about God's Word. Let me know in the comments which country you're watching this video from. I would love to know. Thank you so much for watching until the end. See you in the next video. God bless you.